Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Parcel Monitor's Unpacking series, where industry experts unpack key concepts from trending topics in retail, e-commerce, logistics, and supply chain. My name is Arne, and I'm the founder and CEO of Parcel Perform, and I'm moderating today's session. Today, we are extremely happy to have with us Group CEO of Post Malaysia, Charles Brewer. Charles started his career in DHL in 1984 and spent the last 34 years in various leadership roles among major logistics companies around the world, including Canada Post, DHL e-commerce, and many more. So thank you for joining us today, Charles. To kick things off, maybe one first question. Could you introduce yourself to our community without using the words logistics and e-commerce?
Oh, come on, that's not very fair. You can't do that to me, but I'll try. So anyway, Anna, first and foremost, really lovely to see you. It's been some years. I think COVID has done many things to us, but clearly you've stayed young and handsome, and I put on weight. So that's not such a good thing, but it's great to see you after a few years. And for those that I haven't met before, your audience, lovely to meet you all. My name's Charles. I'm English by birth, an Arsenal fan. Don't hold that against me. I apologize profusely for that. And as mentioned, I've been in the industry. So there you are, I'm not using that word. I've been in the industry for more than 35 years and I love it. And I'm now in Malaysia, obviously. So that's good.
Awesome. Let's get right started there. So over the past 2 years, the pandemic had a major impact on our supply chain, and we have seen major shocks to the logistical systems around the world. And supply chain resilience has become a topic that is more important over these previous months. As you have been a leader in the industry across multiple companies, if you compare it to the time before the pandemic, how have the recent years shaped management and business priorities for supply chain leaders from your point of view?
I mean, I think COVID has had, well, the pandemic's had massive implications on the supply chain, right the way through from ships and air freight and ocean freight through to what I sort of traditionally look after, post and parcel. So, I've been involved in post and parcel throughout the pandemic, and to give you and your audience sort of a bit of a few indicators of some of those changes. Pre-COVID, and I was in Canada pre-COVID. Sort of the penetration of retail sales was roughly around 10% globally, depending on who you look at and depending which countries you look at. It was around 10%, and that shot up obviously through the pandemic as you had existing online shoppers who were shopping more. You had brand new shoppers who had never shopped online, if you can believe that. Shoppers who had never shopped online, who came online, had to come online, and you had online shoppers who were buying certain categories, who then moved into new categories, and that sort of really accelerated that penetration of e-commerce and online sales. And again, to share some statistics, I think it was in July 2020, or actually, sorry, my apologies, May 2020. I was sitting in Canada in Ottawa, and on a Monday, we did the volume on that Monday, the 26th of May, if I remember rightly. We did the volume on that day that we had predicted to do 9 years in the future. So we sort of advanced volumes by 9 or 10 years. And I think most postal operators kind of seen that same, sudden rush, huge increase. And again, for those who are not in the logistics sector, perhaps may not appreciate, but doing those volumes in any environment is challenging. But doing those volumes on pretty much the same infrastructure you had as 2 weeks before COVID started, and with social distancing, and with absenteeism, and with, really did test even seasoned logisticians like myself. It was, I have to say, I love it because I enjoy that sort of challenge and that rush, but at the same time, it was really testing, and again, on a more humanistic perspective, really testing for those delivering the last mile. So whether it be a postman or a courier in Canada, or here in Post Malaysia, where they've been operating in that same sort of environment for 2.5 years, is really quite staggering. And even today, and if you sort of, okay, well, is that changing? And I'll come back to Post and Parcel in a second, because it is changing. But even today, if you look at what's happening in China right now. So we sort of, for many countries, we're coming out of the other side of COVID in some respects. I know where you are in Singapore, the new norms are there pretty much. Here in Malaysia, definitely. So, in the UK, mask, you barely see somebody wearing a mask. Now they're not mandatory. So the world is changing, but just in the last few weeks, in March, Shanghai and China have mandated a complete shutdown, and I'm sure everybody's seen the pictures and images of the ships sitting outside what is one of the world's largest ports in the world, Shanghai, with hundreds of ships sitting outside in the port waiting to unload or load. So 2 years ago, we were facing significant supply chain challenges related to, sort of Los Angeles and the west coast of the US, which was mainly to do with labor shortages as opposed to anything else. And then, as I said, only 2 or 3 weeks ago, Shanghai started, and we're seeing huge supply chain challenges there. And the best way to describe it, somebody else used this, so I'm stealing it from them. But if you're driving along the motorway or a highway or a fast-moving road, and there is a single accident or incident 5 miles up, that ripple effect coming back down the highway means you sit in a really slow traffic jam. Even though it's one small incident, you sit in that slow traffic jam for hours and hours and hours. It's the same with supply chain. So those bottleneck challenges in the West Coast 2 years ago and now in Shanghai have long-term ripple effects, which we can talk about the impacts of that. But that's the kind of environment we're working in. And then just coming back to post and parcel, so those huge sort of spikes through COVID that we saw with different waves and with lockdowns and so on and so forth. Around September, October last year, and using Malaysia as an example, as it started to open up, we started to see a slowdown in online orders as people went back to the shops. And even just this week, I saw the US just announced their retail sales numbers, and the retail, these sort of bricks and mortar sales are up single digit, but they're up, and online e-commerce is down. But that shouldn't be a shock to anybody for the same reasons it wasn't here in Malaysia. People have been away from the malls for 2.5 years, want to go back. I still think it doesn't change the overall trajectory of online, but it has a short-term impact for sure.
No, for sure. And I think that's also was visible in the peak season, that there's more kind of traffic going back to the standard retail. But I can imagine joining Post Malaysia during this particular challenging time was quite an interesting experience. What was the first thing you prioritized when you joined as a group CEO in the company? Apologies, I believe Charles is frozen.
Okay, I'm back, I think. So it's been a very interesting sort of 8 or 9 months. Really busy, that's for sure. But anyway, to your question, the priority in the first 3, 4, 5 months was really around fixing the basics. So, and again, Arnie, you've been around logistics a long time. It's a challenging business. It's a complicated business, but we're not sending people to the moon, so it's not rocket science. The objective is very simple. When somebody orders, that we pick up, we move it, and we deliver it. So the priority for me when I first came in were really 2 things. One is getting a real pulse of our employees, understanding from their perspective where they think Post Malaysia is going right or where it's going wrong. And similarly with our customers, really listening to as many customers as possible around what their perspectives of Post Malaysia are and what they see as that we're doing right or wrong. And what was really obvious is, I think trust comes through on both sides. That in some respects over the last few years, we've broken the trust with our employees, and we've somewhat broken the trust with our customers. So you only re-establish that by your behaviors and what you do. So a lot of our focus over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 months has been doing the basics and doing them really well. And so far so good. It's going pretty well, actually. So still a long way to go, but certainly making a lot of progress in some of the key milestones. In particular, the service elements have been really critical. Get those right, and if customers start trusting you that you can pick up and deliver, then you're in a fairly good place.
No, that's very interesting. Can you give us one example of what you and your team is most proud of accomplishing during this crisis?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said earlier, and again, for those who perhaps not as close to the sector as we are, if you use the analogy of the restaurant, if you go to a restaurant, the reason you go back is because the food's great. It's not because of the lighting or the ambience. Fundamentally it's the food. The other bits are, if you like, the pixie dust. And in our space, that sort of fundamental, the core piece of our business is service that we pick up and deliver on time. So to your question, Anna, and I have to be honest, I didn't anticipate or expect that we could turn it around and change it so quickly, but the operations team here are fantastic. So in August, when I came in, 1st of August, our next day service level, which I'm sure you're monitoring from Parcel Perform, our next day service level was around about 50, call it 50%. So somewhere around 50%. So 1 in 2 parcels being delivered next day, and as per our service level agreement, which clearly isn't where we'd want to sit. That's not in any way, shape, or form industry leading, nor does it meet the demands of our customers. So that was, as I mentioned earlier, that was kind of one of the first priorities. There are many others. I have pages and pages of things that we need to fix and do differently, but that's an absolutely key priority to get your service right. So to your question, the thing that I'm most proud of is that was August 1st, and as we sit here today, we're now at 92% next day. So I mean, we got up to the high 80s in about September, October. So in about 2 or 3 months, we were able to quickly turn that around, or the operations team were. And now we sit at 92%, and we test, as I know you do too, we test our service vis-a-vis the competitors and look at how we're performing versus the people that we play against here in Malaysia. And again, I'm very proud that we are the best performing next day provider in Malaysia, which is something. And again, it's not me, it's the operations team. They've done a truly outstanding job. And as I mentioned, I really genuinely didn't believe that we would be able to turn it around so quickly, but they did it really super fast. And what's really fascinating is, again, it's obvious stuff. In August, I was just getting a deluge of customer complaints, and now I get a deluge of customers saying how fantastic it is. So, it does what the can says. If you serve good food, people come back. And I think that we're starting to see that. Long way to go, but starting to see that with Post Malaysia, that customers are appreciating the service that 15,500 couriers and postmen are providing on a daily basis, which is something to be very proud of.
No, that's fantastic kind of news, and I'm sure great news for anyone in Malaysia, using e-commerce. But I think this also boils down to what we talked about, leadership in supply chain. I think I remember pre-pandemic, it was a lot about planning. So whenever you build a supply chain, you build plans and scenarios, and that's your daily life, because the more you can anticipate, the better. But I think the pandemic has proven everyone wrong, because nobody had a plan for this. So I think what mattered to be a good leader in supply chain is not to have the plan, but to be able to fast operationally act and change the supply chain. Do you think that's a kind of very sustained skill in the supply chain, or will we move back to the planning part?
Well, I'm a bit of a planner, so I won't necessarily deviate too much. I mean, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you I'm a list maker. I like to know what we're doing each day and each weekend, etc. So I think plans won't necessarily go away. But I think, again, like I said earlier, COVID and the pandemic's had many impacts on the industry and on people. Some good, some obviously a lot not very good. I think from a business perspective, the phrase agility was relevant before, but is even more relevant now. So, like I mentioned earlier, when you're faced, that famous quote, everybody has a plan until you're punched in the face. It's so true. And we got punched in the face with this sort of 10x the volume. And you could have the greatest plans in the world, but you got 10x. It comes down to humans and people working it out on the fly. And I think, again, like you, Arno, we've been around the logistics sector a long time, and it is a sector that is rapidly evolving with technology and advancement, with all sorts of different tools and techniques and IT solutions. But the reality is we still have a lot of people. And again, if I look at what Post Malaysia has done over the last 7 or 8 months, some of that is process, some of that is technology, but a lot of it is just execution. Really good people that execute really, really well every single day. So I think the phrase agility, I think, is far more relevant today than it ever was. So we are, and we were in Canada Post, advancing a lot of the things that we had planned for sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years out. So advancing incremental capacity, advancing incremental automation. We're just talking about it this morning. So one of the sort of byproducts of the growth of e-commerce and parcel is there's less resource. There's less people available, and we have in our main hub here, we operate with about 450 people, and those people have been attracted away with all sorts of cash incentives to go and work in other environments. So it gets tougher and tougher. So that question means that you need to start looking, okay, what technology and automation can we use that means we're less reliant on manual labor necessarily in unloading a skip or unloading a container or whatever it may be. So I think everything is fair game. Everything is fair game. Advancing as much as you possibly can the plans that you had in place for 7 or 8, 9, 10 years, being mindful of the fiscal environment from that action. But I think that having being brave to tackle some of those challenges that perhaps you wouldn't have done previously. I mean, again, as you know, Anna, not every customer in e-commerce makes a great customer. So being brave with your pricing decisions, I think that's something that's changed. If you look at some of the bigger carriers globally, and a lot of the post and parcel operators, they've used price to filter out the volumes that perhaps don't make so much sense to them. In some respects, that creates opportunities for others. But that's something that the pandemic, I think, has accelerated. As I mentioned earlier, so the human side of the business, that's accelerated, being much more conscious of the health and safety of our employees. When everybody else was sitting at home, quite rightly, by the way, postmen and couriers are out there still delivering, and we still got complaints about where's my barbecue, and we didn't get very many comments saying thank you for taking your life in your hands and coming out and delivering. So we have to be conscious of the impact on our people. I think ESG has been accelerated incredibly on the back of the pandemic. So pandemic means more volume means more trucks and vans in the road. That has all sorts of implications in terms of the greening discussion. So I think in short, the short version, Anna, is that I don't know that planning will always be there, and I would advocate that. But I think it's having the ability to be agile within those plans and saying, okay, I'm going to accelerate some, decelerate others, and make braver and swifter decisions than perhaps I would have previously. So I think a lot of bureaucracy and red tape in decision making, something that you don't need to worry about as a startup. But in our environment, as you'd imagine, with 200 years history, the amount of people that need to sign off for one scanner is unbelievable. But that's all changed as a result of COVID. We need to operate much, much faster, move fast. So I think it's had implications across virtually every part of the business in one way, shape, or form.
No, I think one of the things that probably made it a little bit easier is the incredible growth. Because if the business only grows or by 2%, I think you have to build this control measures in place. If you're growing by 50%, I think finding the support for investments, for automation, for all these kind of technologies that probably were not so easy to implement is a lot better. And we've seen this across carriers around the globe, that the attitude towards these investments, automation, new service offerings has changed dramatically. Also because consumers all of a sudden have very different attitude towards e-commerce. It's part of their daily life. They depend on it. So the bar is much higher for consumers to
yeah, and that's a really good point. I've been asked many times, did the consumers' expectations change through the pandemic? And the answer is no. If anything, they increased. I think there was a level of tolerance in wave one that I think most people knew that the volumes had gone up considerably. So I think there was a level of tolerance certainly in the early stage, but that quickly reverted to where's my package and why haven't you delivered it 1 hour ago? So I think to your point, and we would have done this anyway, but more critically, more quickly, with more focus. We're looking at what can we use, what is available, what's commercially available technology-wise that we can use in our business that ticks the boxes around things like health and safety for our employees, keeping our employees motivated, keeping them engaged, through to our service levels. What can we use in technology to push more volume through the system? So, again, a great example is our hub has the capacity, if you read the booklet, it has the capacity to do 350,000 parcels a day. We did 400 last Monday, and more on Sundays, and without, nothing broke, nothing fell over, because the system always has the capability of doing more if you find different ways to induct parcels, sort the parcels, get the parcels out, telescopic conveyors, etc., etc. So if you look at the entire end-to-end process and say, I need to eke out 1 cent of productivity or 1 cent of service improvement, 1 percentage point of service improvement, that's what I think the pandemic has done. Certainly for me, I mean, we were always doing that, but perhaps not with the haste. And then lastly, to your point, it's from a customer perspective, everybody's fighting for that same sort of space. So how do we keep the customer super happy? How do we make them love Post Malaysia? And again, we were coming from a place that wasn't so great. So everything we do, I think, is a quantum change for our customers. So I think it's, as I said, it wasn't that those weren't there before. I think they were, but just with heightened pace, heightened need, because you're faced with 3x, 4x, 5x the volume.
One of the key things you emphasized is the notion of agility. So everyone needs to embrace it in this new world, obviously with the high expectations. But how do you train that, or how do you change that agility mindset in the company? Having a classroom training, half a day agility training is probably not going to cut it. How do you do that?
So it's a fantastic conversation. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we have reams and reams of things we want to do differently at Post Malaysia. And I have reams from my first sort of few months here where I was notating things that we need to do differently. But anyway, one big piece is culture. And that's a little bit less related to the pandemic, but we would have done this anyway. But, again, we have this fantastic and wonderful, rich history. But that rich history also comes with negatives. Yeah, we've always done it this way. One of our postmen retired yesterday. He's been in the company 48 years. 48 years is incredible. But you can imagine that, and he's a fantastic chap. He's in Sabah. He's a fantastic guy. Just retired yesterday. But he's probably looking at the business through the lenses of how he's always done it. So that history comes with the legacy traits as well. So to your point, we started and embarked on a cultural transformation program which underpins all of the other pillars that we're currently focused on and operating on. And anyway, to your question, I get asked and have been asked many times, what drives that cultural change? And I'll give you the answer according to Charles. It may not be the best answer, but I'll give you my view. My view is it's not a poster, it's not a cup, it's not a t-shirt, it's not a mouse mat if you still have them. It's none of that. It's not a slogan, the one that I've seen very often and drives me batty, which is, customer service is an attitude, not a department. It's all nonsense, so that I really dislike those sort of posters and those sort of commentary. I think fundamentally, and to your question, and what you want that culture to be is a function of how we behave. Yeah. So when you talk about, if you talk about agility, and one of our values is move fast. So it links very nicely to agility. But move fast is a thinking space, not a driving space. We don't want people to interpret move fast as go at 5 kilometers faster. It's more about how we operate, how we think, to your point earlier, how we make decisions, how we respond to customers, how quickly we respond to customers. So to your point, how do you create that culture? And we're still early days, so ask me in a year's time if it's worked. But fundamentally, it starts with my behaviors. It starts with how I operate. If I'm slow or don't respond to people or don't make decisions sensibly in the right speed, you're creating that culture because that's how I operate. The second one is then with your management team. So the same thing. So are all the excos on the same page when we talk about move fast? And the answer is, in Post Malaysia, no. So we sit here and talk about move fast, and that's one of our values. Then we go and look at some of our processes and procedures, and they just contradict that value statement. So the first one is behavior. of you and your leadership team, and then the leaders who report to the leaders, that people tend to model and follow those same behaviors. So getting those behaviors completely aligned. The second one is looking for contra behaviors. This is really important. So as anybody who's watching this is thinking about sort of this cultural change and bringing in agility or whatever it may be into their business, if you have senior people in your organization that demonstrate contra behaviors, it falls down very fast. And the greatest example of that is if you go to a hotel and behind the hotel reception it says, "We love all our customers, and our pillows will be fluffy, and the breakfast is amazing, and you'll love staying with us." And then you get the key and you go to the lift, and you go up to the 14th floor, and you get to the door, and you put the key on the door, and the door doesn't open. It falls down very fast. So what do you have in your organization, either behaviorally or procedurally, that contradicts that culture? If you have those things, you've got to kill them and kill them fast, because it'll work against you very, very quickly. It doesn't mean you can't make a cultural change, but your level of success will be diminished considerably if what you're trying to create is undermined by either individuals, processes, procedures, branding, or anything else. So it's making sure you have as many of those ducks facing in the right direction as you possibly can. And if one of the ducks is facing the wrong way, deal with the duck as quickly as you possibly can. And then lastly is checking in regularly. So it's easy to sit in my lovely office with my beautiful mailbox behind me and think everything is wonderful and we're moving at pace. But if you go and ask our couriers or postmen or our operators or our channel staff, are we moving quickly? They'll say no. So it's checking in regularly as to where else do you have blind spots with your customers. Where does a customer see that culture isn't delivering on its commitment or its promise? So I think, in short, that's the world according to Charles on culture.
Awesome. No, it sounds amazing. We only have a few minutes left. Maybe last question is, what's the big plan moving forward with Post Malaysia? What are the next big milestones for you to tackle?
Sure. Personally, lose weight. So I'm on a strict diet at the moment. So that's get myself back to fighting form. I think for Post Malaysia, again, like I said earlier, we've made some really, really fantastic strides over the last 8 or 9 months, but we have a long way to go. And in short, we want to rebuild Post Malaysia to be a company that Malaysians trust and love doing business with. That's the aim. And that applies to our employees as much to our customers, by the way. So having a company that people love working for, having a company that people love doing business with, you're probably in a fairly good place. The opportunity, the upside for e-commerce and e-commerce parcel is, remember that even pre-COVID it was 10% of sales. Now let's say it's 18% of sales. It still has an 80-point upside. So I think the opportunity is absolutely outstanding. It's really then just orientating Post Malaysia to really capitalize on that opportunity. So that would be that's our mission.
Oh, that sounds amazing. It's growing at factor of 5. Then all the best to you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate Charles for joining us today. Please all follow Parcel Monitor's LinkedIn page for the next events with industry leaders like Charles, and get the latest news and insights about e-commerce logistics. Thanks everyone for joining today.